Welcome back to American Heritage Journal. Today, we are taking a deep look behind the polished chrome and neon lights of the 1950s, an era often called the American Golden Age. When we think of this time, we usually imagine a world of white picket fences and stable families. We think of the wholesome household seen on television shows like Leave It to Beaver. It is a mental image of economic stability and community comfort. We remember the human scale of the neighborhood variety store where the aisles were filled with honest goods and simple promises. However, beneath this polished facade lay a complex reality. This was a world defined by systemic inequality, social repression, and environmental hazards that we rarely discuss in our nostalgic retellings. Today, we are opening the records to reveal the hidden truths about life in the 1950s. We will explore the massive gap between the televised dream and the lived experience of millions. While the post-war era is remembered for its booming middle class, a massive segment of the population was actually left behind. Prosperity was not a universal experience for every American family. In 1959, the United States poverty rate was a staggering 22.4%. This is nearly double the poverty rate we see in the modern world today. Approximately 40 million people lived in poverty during this decade. These families often resided in rural Appalachia or urban slums that were effectively invisible to the suburban television audience. While people were collecting S&H green stamps in the suburbs, others were struggling to put food on the table. The prosperity was concentrated in very specific zip codes. We often hear that the GI Bill was the great engine of the middle class. It allowed veterans to return home, buy houses, and go to college with government support. But the GI Bill's benefits were administered locally in a way that systemically excluded black veterans. This created a racial divide that changed the landscape of American wealth forever. White veterans completed college at double the rate of their black counterparts. Black veterans were frequently steered into fraudulent vocational schools rather than prestigious universities. They were also systematically denied the low-interest home loans that built the suburbs. This cemented a generational wealth gap that still persists in our country today. The pressure to conform to the perfect family archetype also took a severe psychological toll. This was especially true for women living in the quiet, isolated houses of the new suburbs. In 1955, the first minor tranquilizer, known as Milltown, was released to the public. It quickly became a massive cultural phenomenon across the entire United States. By the end of the decade, 1 in every 3 prescriptions written in the country was for tranquilizers. These little pills were often called Mother's Little Helper by the public. Women were prescribed these happy pills at twice the rate of men. They were used to treat what doctors called housewife syndrome, a label for profound boredom and isolation. Many women felt a lack of agency while confined to domestic roles. Behind the pristine kitchen counters of the 1950s, many were struggling with a silent, medicated unhappiness. While the Red Scare was targeting communists, a parallel purge was happening in the shadows. This was known as the Lavender Scare, and it targeted the LGBTQ community. Under McCarthyism and President Eisenhower's Executive Order 10450, thousands of individuals were targeted. An estimated 7,000 to 10,000 people were fired or forced to resign from federal jobs. They were suspected of being gay, which was considered a national security risk at the time. The justification was that these employees were morally weak and susceptible to foreign blackmail. This moral panic destroyed thousands of careers and lives. It forced a massive segment of the population to live in constant fear and total secrecy to survive. The 1950s wholesome lifestyle was also lived in an environment that was incredibly dangerous by modern standards. Daily life was filled with hazards that we now strictly regulate. Smoking was considered the absolute norm for adults. Over 42% of United States adults were regular smokers during this decade, and it was seen everywhere. Tobacco companies like Camel even used slogans claiming that more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. This was a deliberate effort to reassure a trusting public. You could find people smoking in grocery stores and offices, and even at the bedsides of patients in hospitals. The air was thick with smoke in almost every public space. Driving a car was also significantly more lethal than it is today. In 1950, the motor vehicle death rate was roughly 5 times higher per mile driven. When you sat behind the wheel of a heavy steel sedan, you weren't protected by modern safety tech. Seat belts were not even standard equipment in most cars until 1958. There were no mandatory laws for their use, and many people simply ignored them. The roads were dangerous, and the cars were often rolling hazards without any crash protection. The clean air we associate with the past is also largely a myth. Leaded gasoline was ubiquitous, resulting in massive lead exposure for children and adults alike. Researchers now link this lead exposure to lower IQs and higher crime rates in the decades that followed. The environmental cost of the 1950s car culture was immense. Major cities frequently suffered from deadly smog events during this time. In 1950, a Los Angeles smog event was so thick that it actually blinded drivers on the road. It caused massive respiratory crises for the people living there. The sky was often gray with industrial and automotive pollution that we would find unacceptable today. Social norms of the 1950s also prioritized the sanctity of the home over individual safety. This left many people vulnerable to violence within their own families. Marital rape was legal in all 50 states during this decade. Under the marital exemption rule, a husband could not be prosecuted for harming his wife in this way. Legally, a woman was considered to have given irrevocable consent the moment she said her marriage vows. This left women with almost no legal protection in their own homes. Domestic violence was also widely considered a private family matter. The police rarely intervened unless the violence spilled out into the public streets for everyone to see. Wife beating was frequently treated with a simple slap on the wrist by the authorities. Victims were often lectured by officials to be more submissive to their husbands to keep the peace. When we compare the 1950s to today, the statistics tell a very clear story. The poverty rate has dropped from over 22% to around 11.5% in recent years. Workforce participation for women has nearly doubled since that era. In the 50s, it was only 29% compared to about 57% in the modern world. Car safety has improved dramatically, with deaths per 100 million miles driven dropping from 5.1 to 1.1. We now have mandatory airbags and strict safety standards. The smoking rate has also plummeted from over 42% down to about 11.5%. We have moved away from the toxic habits that were once considered standard behavior. While we look back at the variety stores and the craftsman tools that lasted a lifetime, we must remember the whole picture. The 1950s were not a simpler time. They were a highly regulated time where the costs of social stability were paid by those who didn't fit. The peace was maintained through the silencing of dissent and the medicating of unhappiness, the legal exclusion of minorities, and the systemic pressure to conform defined the era. It was a time of great beauty for some, but great struggle for many others. We hope this look into the archives of American Heritage Journal has given you a new perspective. It is important to remember the reality behind the nostalgia we all feel. Thank you for joining us as we walk through the forgotten aisles of our history. We will continue to explore the things worth remembering from our shared American past. Until next time, keep looking closer at the stories we tell about where we came from. The truth is often more complex and more fascinating than the legend,